This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have award-winning short story writer and 3-series novelist Nancy Cole Silverman here to talk about her new release, A Spy in Saigon. Welcome, Nancy.
Oh, Marie, thank you. It's wonderful to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you because, oh my goodness, I cannot wait to jump into this book. I was holding my breath at the ending. I'm so excited to start to unpack it. But before we do, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
Kate Lawson is a reporter, a travel reporter for a publication called Journey International, which is kind of a cover publication. It's a real true travel publication, but from time to time, her handler, who is the publisher and says she's retired from an FBI, sends her off on assignments to cover stories. And in this case, the opening of tourism in Vietnam in the late 90s. But while she's there, she's to deliver a package. Now, back during the Cold War, the FBI and the CIA did use civilians to deliver packages or to make contact with somebody because they didn't want to risk an asset. So I did a lot of research to make sure this really could be, and it really was. And so she goes to Vietnam to deliver this package to an asset who wants to defect and come to America. And so that's the purpose of her being in Vietnam at that time, under the ruse of writing a new travel feature because of the opening of opportunities for tourism.
And when she gets there, some serious chaos unfolds.
Oh, all hell breaks out. I mean, come on, I'm a writer. It wouldn't be a story if it was real convenient and she went and she delivers the package and then they go have champagne and then she goes home and everything is fine. No, she goes to a jewelry shop. And while she's there, several things happen. The man isn't quite ready to come out and greet her, the man she's supposed to give the package to, and she's looking at the counter and she realizes she recognizes a bracelet, which kind of harkens to her past because it's a bracelet that her first husband had given her when he was stationed in Vietnam. And then she kind of backs away and the clerk was there said, well, let me show you something else. And he hands her a beautiful diamond necklace. He says, this is from the Shah, from Saudi Arabia. And she's looking at that. And when she does, the man who she's to meet comes out from behind an office in the back at the same moment as a man comes into the store and there are gunshots fired. She crouches down, covers, and the man she's to give the package to is shot dead. And the man that shot him jumps over the counter and escapes. There we are. Her delivery does not go as planned.
It does not. And I said that the ending took my breath away. It was first snatched in that opening scene. It just kind of held on to me the whole time because I had to find out what the heck is going on here. And the way that you did it with this kind of innocent, low-level courier, and then this amazing mystery unfolds around it. Your brain, Nancy, I have to take my hat off to you. This was so smartly done, the way that you set up the puzzle for us to solve. And every time I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, I need a notepad. I need to keep track. Like I'm solving this mystery in a much more serious way than you do in some mysteries. How did you do that?
Well, it helps because I was able to travel to Vietnam. In all of these mysteries, they're really basically armchair travel mysteries where if you wanted to pretend you'd gone to these countries, you could sit in your armchair and kind of hopefully see and experience each book's location because they're all in different parts of the world. But I had been in Vietnam and I remembered the thing that was most disorientating was that the minute I left the airport and they opened those big glass doors was a sea of people. I have never seen so many people going in so many directions at one time, like bees swarming in between each other and around. And there are no stoplights. There are no stop signs. You just go and cross the street. So she runs out of the store, and then she's faced with going back into traffic and where's she going to go. And then she meets two people who will be her kind of her guides while she's in Europe, because they rescue her in the middle of a traffic circle. And they're two very interesting Vietnamese fellows who had been guides during the war. And they're on a little bike carrier, and they say, "Get in, we'll help you." And they start singing songs, which is very American, which was very welcoming. And I actually had that experience. So I don't know, that just is part of what's planted back in there, is those visual experiences I actually had, and actually did meet those two people in that book that way.
Well, that was one of the other questions I wanted to ask, because this setting is so beautiful and so evocative. You gave us the city, and you also gave us a little of the jungle. So I've been dying to know, Nancy, did you get out into the countryside when you were in Vietnam?
Oh, I did. And it was really fun. And I sometimes think, I don't know why I get myself into these situations, but probably because I always thought I'm going to come out just fine. My mother used to say, "Nancy, you could walk across the street and fall in a mud puddle and still come out smelling like a rose," which I thought was really, I've got to find a place to use that, because I think that's really very good. But we did go to the jungle, and I was hesitant to go to Vietnam as a tourist at first, because I was a young Air Force wife during the Vietnam War. And I had a lot of friends who ended up at the Hanoi Hilton, and a lot of girlfriends whose husbands were POWs and MIA. And so there was a little bit of a kind of a ghostly disturbance about going there. But I thought, this is a country I really need to go back to. And it was very, very informative. One of the things that, of course, the Vietnamese refer to this as the American War. We were the invaders. We here tend to think of it as the Vietnamese War. And so I was very anxious to get out and see everything I could. And as Kat arrives early into Ho Chi Minh City, which is formerly Saigon, and she learns all the patriots refer to it, or the North Vietnamese, which have established Saigon as Ho Chi Minh City, and you dare not call it Saigon, are very, very adamant about that. But they also, they won the war because of the tunnels. So I had the opportunity when I was traveling to actually go into the jungle and actually climb into a tunnel, which is, again, I said, why did I do this? But, you know, I'm tall, I'm almost 5'10". Fortunately, I'm slim, but those tunnels are made for tiny people, and, you know, there's no backing out. So you just have to keep going, and it's very pitch black dark, and it's sandy, and you can imagine these tunnels that we crawled in were cleaned up for tourists, and so they were probably even enlarged a bit. But if you were a warrior, if you were an American, a tunnel rat, or you were a North Vietnamese soldier, you climbed through. There were scorpions and bugs and snakes and bombs set in there to sabotage anybody who might come in. It was a very frightening time. Plus, these tunnels were like, you know, if you look at an ant farm and a piece of glass, you can see big pockets of holes where there's, you know, storage and so forth. Exactly like that. They had a hospital, they had factories, they had kitchens, of which all were ventilated by little pipes that would come up and travel through the ground and underground and be exposed maybe yards and yards away from the actual tunnel entrance of the hole, so that the soldiers advancing didn't see it. You had to know what to look for. So it was very interesting to see and experience that, and I was glad I did. So I had to find a way to incorporate it into the book, and it was very necessary to be part of the story.
Well, it was absolutely incredible, and as listeners will now know, there's good reason to be holding your breath.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
You did such a good job of bringing together this, I don't know, I guess the thing that I was most reminded of were those, you know, post-World War II movies where they give you a city in Europe and you just know it was crawling with special agents and double agents, and you didn't know who to trust. And oh my gosh, you did the same thing here. I mean, how did you get so good at creating that underbelly of the spy world?
Well, when you go into Vietnam, they ask you why you're there. You know, it is a communist country. You know, you have to understand that when you go, you will be watched. And when you're in a tourist attraction, your guides will tell you. I can tell you about the American War in this museum. If you want to know more information later, we need to go elsewhere, of which you would then take the guide to lunch or something, and he would talk more candidly about his experience of the history and so forth. But they couldn't do it in public. They had to be very careful about that. They were constantly being watched. And we knew that. I carry a press pass. I did not bring it in my wallet, just because, don't want to experience anything. I did note that when we went into Saigon, you go in through customs, and they look at your passport and they ask you why you're here. And we said we were here on tour, just a tour. And they asked where we were going. We were going to be taking a route up the Mekong, and then we'd go into Cambodia, and then we'd come back to Cambodia, out of Cambodia, and we'd fly to Hanoi. And when we came back into Hanoi, she looked at my passport. She says, "Where did you come in?" And I said, "Saigon," mistakenly. And she said, No, Ho Chi Minh City. And she was very adamant about that. So you're being watched. I don't think as a tourist, we were a bit of interest, but people in that part of the world, particularly after the war and during the war, nobody is always who they say they are. And sides are very gray. And journalists who worked there, as a matter of fact, the first American women journalists who were there during the war, were women who went over voluntarily, didn't even necessarily have press credentials, but they said, if you can get there, contact us and we'll put you in the field. And they really had a hard time because the men didn't want them there. They didn't think they could do the job. And so we actually meet a former journalist who was there during the war. And Kat is not really sure, because of some of the things she says, which side she was actually on.
And I loved that because you wanted Kat to have someone to trust. But as you said, no one is who they seem. And where do you place that trust? And I thought about how fundamental trust is for us as humans. We are social creatures, and we leave our homes and we want to trust that we're going to be safe and that we're going to end up back at our homes. But when you're in an environment like that, where you really can't trust anyone, it was so fun to see how Kat stayed grounded. And it seemed like your way of anchoring her in this maelstrom, this turbulent sea that is Saigon in the year 2000, was to have her come back to the things she cared about. Because again, you're presenting us with, hey, a low-level courier, right? But then you found a way to ratchet up her interest and her goals and what she felt she needed to achieve. And that was, and I hope it's okay to mention, the idea of human trafficking.
Yes, right. Exactly. That's really what caught her, particularly being a single woman and having worked in business. And one of the things about Kat is her first job, which she'd worked so hard to get, was as a reporter for, she's from Phoenix, by the way. And so the newspapers there, the Arizona Republican Gazette back in the day, were owned by the same publisher. And so she had really advanced herself and had a very good job. And she was kind of an up and coming young female reporter. And oh boy, she's had an affair with her boss, and she's fired and he's promoted, which those things happened. But it also ruined her opportunity to go to work for the other paper because they were owned by the same publisher. And she was basically labeled as, not somebody we want around. So she had to go find another job. So having to do that and realizing how life can be so unfair to women who can be vulnerable. You have a relationship with the wrong man. You are a young girl, you're feeling full of your oats, and suddenly you're pulled into an underground world. Or, for instance, in Vietnam, you're just a child, perhaps the child of the dust, who they referred to, children who were not fully Vietnamese, but born in Vietnam by soldiers, either Russian or American, who were there. And so these are children who were just cast out and could be sold. And so Kat has a connection to all of this, injustice for women particularly, and injustice for kids. When she finds out that's the real reason she's there, was the purpose of the money and the passports was to give to a man who wanted out of this business, she really grips onto that and thinks, I could leave, but I won't leave those kids. I will do what I can to stop this. She has a lot of confidence in who she is, falsely. I've tried to paint her, we're talking about some very serious topics, but I've tried to keep a certain amount of levity to all of these books, because I think if you get too dark, you lose, people just, I don't want to read that. she's very committed to what she does. She gets that sniff of a story, and the adrenaline, and any reporter will tell you, once you get onto a story, you do not want to let go. There is just something about it that you just feel like it's in your blood. Your blood just is pulsing because you've really got to get the answers there, and you feel you owe it to your readers. You owe it to help those that you can help with getting the story out, honestly. So that's where she's coming from.
Well, one of the other things I thought you handled so well was the concept of acceptance. You forced the reader to look at acceptance from a variety of perspectives. And one of the obvious ones is there are people telling her that she needs to accept that this is the way things are. And she just needs to go on with her life and move forward. She was here for one reason. She doesn't need to stay. Yet on the other side of the coin, you show us another example of acceptance where Kat doesn't fight anymore. She does accept something. Why was it important for you to kind of, flip the lens on that? Because I thought it was so beautifully done and is such a resonant theme for all of us when we're reading it, because I think we do as humans struggle with acceptance.
I love your questions. Thank you, Marie. And I'm thinking back to when I was in high school, I had a very good English instructor and teacher. And, she or he, said, Nancy, all themes will come from internal struggles with yourself, and struggles with your fellow man, and struggles with nature. This book, I think, covers all three. And we do struggle with ourselves. And as the book gets into the second half of the book, there's a big flip. And I won't get into that because it would be a spoiler. But she realizes she's struggling with herself with the truth. But to tell the truth will cost others. And she has to make peace with that. This is the internal struggle we all have. And I think when you can do that as a writer, which you can find things, and by, couching it as I did in the story, I hope to reach something challenging a reader that they themselves would relate to that and go, yeah, I get that. That's one of these unfinished things we're never going to have an answer to, but for the greater good go I. And that was really what I hope to do with that.
It's one of those things that I guess you do struggle your whole life, right? Where are the places where I should fight and not accept? And where are the places where I do have that, kind of like the serenity prayer, right? Where are the places that I do just kind of let go and realize that this is either the way things need to be, or this is too big a hill to climb, or whatever it is that we have to make peace with. I think that's kind of that razor's edge we're always walking to figure out what is our path and are we on the right one?
Exactly. And I think as a writer, you realize you're not going to change the world. I'm not going to solve world peace, but maybe within each reader who picks up a book, I can tap into something that motivates them to look at something differently.
You certainly did that here. One of the other things I've been wanting to ask you about, you mentioned POWs and soldiers, airmen who were MIA.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, you made reference to Boris Yeltsin, mm-hmm. and something he mentioned in the 90s. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And this, my background is during the late 60s, early 70s, I married my college sweetheart, much like my character did. And he was in the Air Force. His draft number was number 2. But he had been part of ROTC because his father had been a colonel. And so he had gone into ROTC to help pay for his college. And so upon graduation, he was immediately enlisted into the Air Force as a young officer. And this is kind of Kat's story, too, where that changes is what happens to him, to her young man, Eric, because Eric goes off to war. And so I was part of a group called Waiting Wives, because when my ex-husband went off to be overseas, those Air Force wives could not stay on base and they had to move off, and they had to find housing. Either they went back to live with their mom and dad, and if they had kids, they had to go rent a house, or they just generally would find another girlfriend who was in the same boat. You weren't attached to the military because you were attached to the military. Matter of fact, it's kind of a funny story I remember, and I think I included in the book. If the Air Force intended for your husband to have a wife, they would have issued him one.
That was in the book. I remember that line. It was a good one.
She had a little bit of trouble with that one. But anyway, so because of that, I met a lot of Air Force wives from all over the country. people during Vietnam, you kind of had to be careful where you were in parts of the country, because there were people who were protesting the war who felt like you were part of it and that you agreed with it. And you may have agreed or not agreed, but you kind of kept those feelings to yourself, because you knew, as an Air Force wife, your husband's next assignment, if they thought you were out protesting, could be very much affected by that. I also had girlfriends whose husbands were shot down during Vietnam. And that's where your comment about Boris Yeltsin comes in. After the war, we were told that all the MIAs came home and there just were no more. But then Kat is going to work one day and she hears a story she hears a radio broadcast with Yeltsin that says, oh no, we have some. We knew they were traded to us, which meant they didn't all come home. And that plays out interestingly in the book as well, that I struggled with. Oh boy, do I do that? Because I had a lot of friends whose husbands were captured and their stories were near and dear to my heart. And I was wondering if I should use them. So it was a struggle to how much should I put on the page. In the end, I did, because I found a way to do it. And it was, I thought, part of what we need to understand as people. Everything is gray. There are no clear whites and clear black sides on anything. Things that we think we know, we may not really know at all.
Well, I'm so glad that you did, because the only way that we learn, and we hope we learn, is to look back on things that have happened in the past. And if we don't know the truth, we can't benefit from it. So right. It is a wonderful thing that you shared it. And I know that it sounds like it was a conflicted issue for you, but I do appreciate it. And I also want to say, Nancy, that I appreciate the sacrifice that you, so many wives, families, children have made for our military.
Oh, well, thank you. But I really think thanks not to me, but goes to them, because I think that is a group of people we don't really understand of how difficult it is. And, you're in one end of the country for a couple of years and then another end of the country. And then your spouse or significant other, your spouse is yanked out to another part of the world of which you've no say. And the sacrifices are great. And we really, as a country, need to make sure they've got what they need, because when they come home, sometimes they come home just to a spouse that's so worn out and they don't come home full people anymore. And it's not easy. And I think we can't just turn our back and say, well, it's somebody else's son. It's somebody else's daughter. It's our daughters and sons. It's our people. We as a country need to come together and understand that and be careful where we put our troops. It can't just be at a whimsy of, we're going to go in and we're going to reestablish. That never ends well.
It never does. And, there's a point where you look at all of the wars, if you're just a student of history in general, and you go back to ancient empires all over the planet, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody's making war. And what do they ever really get out of it? Maybe one person or a group of people's goals are achieved for a certain amount of time, but things change. They always do. And it's such an illusory concept to think I'm going to control this region, or I'm going to control these people. I'm going to get, no, it never works out that way. And so you're right. There's so much that's lost in war. And if we could be as a species more circumspect about those things and realizing what those prices are and what those costs are long-term before we go into them. And thankfully, you sharing stories like yours and others that you've known, I think goes a long way towards that.
It's interesting because when I was looking around to start a new series in the Kat Lawson series, it began with the fact that my father had been a World War II bombardier navigator. And when he passed, I found his flight log. He'd been shot down. And this opened up a whole world to me that I never expected to be writing about, and indeed touched my own life, because I thought years later, I was a military wife and went through experiences. And I thought, I never thought I would sit down and write this series, but I'm getting a lot out of this series, because that really bothers you needs to get written.
It really does, because if it bothered you, like your teacher told you all those years ago, it's probably bothering somebody else too. And, yeah. And even the folks that aren't bothered can be educated and learn and maybe change their perceptions on things too. So absolutely a wonderful story from start to finish, Nancy. Now, I do want to ask you one last quick question. For listeners on the podcast, they have probably heard a little rattle of metal as we've been chatting. And I was wondering, who is it there in your home office who is accompanying you today?
Oh, that's my poodle, Paris. And I've been telling her to be quiet. I've come short of just shh, because she looks out the window, and she's my little editor all day long. She sits on my couch, and she's a standard poodle. And if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see all kinds of pictures with her. She's wonderful. She's the 5th standard poodle I have. She's a great friend.
Well, I have seen her on social media, and she is absolutely gorgeous in every way. So I am so glad that she was able to sit with us a bit on Twisted Passages. That just makes our episode all the more special.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And for all your existing fans, for your existing series, short stories, and for new fans who will find you from A Spy in Saigon, where is the best place for people to find out what's coming next, Nancy?
I'm working on the 5th book in the series right now, and the working title is A Cold Case in London. That'll be out next year. You can find all of my books you can ask for them in bookstores, they'll order them, or on Amazon, or anywhere where books are sold.
Again, a wonderful read. It is called A Spy in Saigon. And if you love spy thrillers, you are going to love this one.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you again, Nancy. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.